There are things that don't hurt you all at once. They wear you down because you've been tolerating them for too long, and some of them don't need a fight to disappear from your life. You simply need to stop sustaining them. Sometimes the exhaustion doesn't come from one major problem. It comes from small compromises repeated over the years. Explaining a decision that belongs only to you. Changing your plans because someone else has decided that what they need is urgent. Keeping open a possibility that the facts have already closed. Continuing to honor commitments that belonged to another stage of your life. None of that seems serious when it happens once. The problem begins when it becomes your usual way of living. Then you start spending your attention before you even realize it. You catch yourself thinking too much about how other people will react, rearranging your day around problems you didn't create, trying to prevent disappointments that may not even be yours to prevent. And the longer you do it, the more normal it begins to feel. Removing something from your life doesn't always mean ending a relationship, quitting a job, or saying some final, definitive sentence. Very often, it means something less visible, stopping the behavior that keeps a certain dynamic alive. That is an important distinction. You can spend years waiting for a situation to change on its own, or you can look at what part of that situation continues because you are still participating in it. The silence we're talking about is not indifference or punishment. It means no longer announcing every boundary, no longer threatening changes you never make, and calmly beginning to withdraw what you no longer want to keep giving. #1. The need for everyone to understand your decisions. Some decisions become exhausting not because they are difficult, but because of how many people you try to justify them to. You decide you need more rest, and you feel like you have to explain why. You turn down an invitation and search for a reason convincing enough that no one will think badly of you. You want to change a routine, set a boundary, spend your money differently, give less time to someone, or walk away from something you no longer want. But before you do it, you start preparing a defense. You are not simply making a decision. You are trying to obtain collective approval. And that changes everything. Because if you need everyone to understand your decision before you feel entitled to make it, you have placed part of your freedom in the hands of people who may never understand it. Even people who love you can look at your life through needs that are different from yours. Someone may consider a boundary excessive because that boundary inconveniences them. They may think you should continue fulfilling an obligation because your availability makes their life easier. They may not understand why something weighs on you simply because it does not weigh on them. Understanding this does not mean ignoring every opinion. Some decisions affect other people and deserve conversation, responsibility, and consideration. Listening to a reasonable objection may prevent you from making a mistake. The problem begins when listening turns into asking for emotional permission to live according to your own judgment. There is a fairly clear sign. You keep explaining even after you have already explained enough. You add details, you rephrase things, you give more reasons. You try to find the exact sentence that will finally make the other person say, "Now I understand. You're right." But maybe that sentence does not exist. And continuing to search, for it can turn a simple decision into weeks of emotional exhaustion. One useful practice is to distinguish between three things: informing, explaining, and convincing. Informing may be necessary. Explaining may be respectful. Convincing is not always your responsibility. You can say that you won't be attending, briefly explain that you need that time, and stop there. You can communicate that you are changing a decision without preparing a 20-minute argument. You can listen to someone disagree with you without automatically interpreting their disagreement as proof that you are doing something wrong. At first, this can be uncomfortable, especially if for years you have associated being a good person with being understandable to everyone. You may feel guilty. You may feel tempted to send another message explaining yourself, add another reason, or reopen a conversation that had already ended. That moment matters, because that is exactly when you begin to discover whether your decision depended on your own judgment or on the reaction you were hoping to create. You do not need to become cold. You need to accept that a life governed from within includes an uncomfortable possibility. Sometimes you will act reasonably, and someone still will not understand you. You can allow that to happen. Not every decision needs to be defended until everyone agrees. Some decisions simply need to be made responsibly and then upheld calmly. #2. Other people's urgencies that you have turned into your priorities. Some people do not need to ask you directly to abandon your priorities. They only need to show up with enough urgency. A message marked urgent, an unexpected phone call, a coworker who failed to organize their work, a family member who needs something solved today because they left it until the last minute. Someone who assumes that because you know how to do something, you can take care of it. And almost without thinking, you rearrange your day. The point here is not to become indifferent to other people's problems. Helping others is part of sharing a life with people. There are moments when someone genuinely needs us to put our own plans aside. The exhaustion begins when you fail to distinguish between an emergency and someone else's urgency. An emergency requires attention. Someone else's urgency may simply be the consequence of their priorities, decisions, or delays. If you treat both situations the same way, your schedule begins to be controlled by whoever arrives with the most anxiety. And that carries a cost that often remains hidden. The task you postpone does not disappear. The rest you interrupt is not automatically restored. The conversation you cancel, the walk you skip, the important work you leave unfinished, or the hour you plan to spend on yourself all have to be pushed somewhere else. Helping someone always takes up something. That is why it should be a choice, not a reflex. Many people become accustomed to responding immediately because speed creates a feeling of usefulness. Solving problems feels good. Being the person who can handle everything can also become a comfortable identity. People trust you, they come to you, they recognize your competence. But there is a difference between being reliable and being permanently available. A reliable person follows through on what they have chosen to take responsibility for. A permanently available person continually allows other people to decide what they should take responsibility for. That difference can completely change the way you respond. When someone comes to you with something urgent, you do not have to say yes or no within the first 10 seconds. You can ask what exactly is happening. You can check whether it genuinely requires your immediate involvement. You can say, "I can't take care of that right now, but I can look at it this afternoon." That small space between the request and your response gives you back something you may have lost, the ability to choose. It will not always be comfortable. Some people have become accustomed to a version of you who rearranges everything whenever they need something. When that availability changes, they may interpret it as distance, selfishness, or lack of concern. But the fact that someone has become accustomed to your availability does not turn your availability into an obligation. It is also worth noticing what happens when you say you cannot deal with something immediately. Sometimes you discover that the thing that seemed absolutely dependent on you finds another solution. The person asks someone else. They solve it themselves. They wait. They decide that perhaps it was not so urgent after all. And then an uncomfortable but useful realization appears. Some burdens stayed on your shoulders because you were always willing to pick them up before checking whether they actually belonged to you. Quietly removing this from your life does not mean you stop helping people. It means you stop reacting automatically to other people's urgency. You can continue to be generous without giving every external emergency the power to decide what happens with your time. Because when everything belonging to someone else can instantly become your priority, what truly matters to you always ends up receiving whatever is left over. #3. The doors you keep open while waiting for someone to change. Some situations end in reality long before they end inside you. A relationship grows distant. A friendship stops being reciprocal. Someone promises to change a behavior and then repeats it. A person shows up when they need something and disappears when you are the one who needs someone there. Months pass. The signs accumulate. But you continue, leaving a small door open. Not because everything is going well, because there is still a maybe. Maybe this time will be different. Maybe they will finally understand. Maybe they will mature. Maybe that conversation will create the chain all the previous conversations failed to create. Maybe someday they will finally be able to give you what you have been waiting for all this time. Hope can be valuable when it accompanies facts that show movement. It becomes expensive when it starts replacing them, because then you are no longer observing the person who is actually in front of you. You are relating to a possibility, and a possibility can always look more promising than reality. That explains why some people remain emotionally available long after they have already received enough information. They do not necessarily return to the relationship, but they do not completely leave it either. They check whether the person has written. They interpret a small sign as the beginning of a change. They imagine what everything could be like if what they have wanted for years finally happened. The door remains open, even though no one is walking through it in a healthy way. Closing that door does not mean deciding that someone is a bad person. It does not mean denying what you felt, dismissing what you experienced, or declaring that the person can never change. It means you stop organizing your present around a change that does not depend on you. Someone may change, but you do not have to stay and wait to find out. That distinction brings back a great deal of clarity. You can pay less attention to promises and more attention to patterns. Not what they said after making a mistake, but what happened afterward. Not how deeply they regretted losing you, but what behavior they were actually able to sustain. not what they claim they will do someday, but what they have been doing for months. The facts do not always give you the answer you want, but they usually give you enough information to decide how you should protect your time, your trust, and your attention. And perhaps you will discover that closing a door does not require one final argument. Sometimes it simply means you stop checking to see whether someone has changed. You stop reserving a place for someone who is not occupying it. You stop living emotionally prepared for a future version of a person who does not yet exist. That can hurt, because closing a possibility also means letting go of the story you imagined. And very often, that is what is truly difficult. Not only losing someone, but losing the version of what you thought the relationship could someday become. But keeping a door open indefinitely also has a price. Every possibility you refuse to close takes attention away from what is actually happening in your life. There are moments when peace does not arrive because someone finally changes. It arrives when you stop needing them to change in order for you to move forward. #4. The need to prove you were right after everything is already over. Some arguments continue for months, even though the other person is no longer there. You remember something they said. You think about the answer you could have given. You come up with a better argument while driving, while showering, or while trying to fall asleep. You imagine a future conversation where you finally explain everything so clearly that the other person has no choice but to acknowledge it. You were right, and for a few seconds, that imagined scene creates a kind of relief. The problem is that it never lasts, because proving that you were right can easily become another way of remaining attached to the very thing you say you want to leave behind. We are not always looking for justice. Sometimes we are looking for a verdict. We want the person who hurt us to acknowledge exactly how they did it. We want the person who doubted us to admit they were wrong. We want the person who distorted the situation to accept our version. We want the person who acted unfairly to understand the full extent of what they caused. That desire is understandable. There is something deeply uncomfortable about a story ending without everyone agreeing on what really happened. But reality does not always give you that kind of closure. A person may continue believing that they were right. They may justify what they did. They may remember events completely differently. They may even understand what happened and still refuse to admit it. Then you face a difficult choice. Keep trying to correct their interpretation or reclaim your attention. Not every mistake someone else makes needs to be corrected inside their own mind before it can stop controlling your life. That does not mean truth is unimportant. If there is a concrete responsibility that needs to be clarified, an injustice that must be addressed, or a practical consequence that requires a conversation, then speaking may be necessary. Silence should not become passivity in situations that genuinely require a response. But very often, there is nothing practical left to resolve. What remains is simply the desire to be recognized as the person who was right. At that point, it is worth noticing how much you are paying for that imaginary victory. You can be right and still lose hours of your life. You can have been treated unfairly and then add weeks of emotional exhaustion. by trying to make the person who hurt you become the same person who validates your pain. You are asking the source of the conflict to also provide the peace. That may never happen. One useful practice is to clearly state for yourself what you know happened and what you learned from it. Then ask whether there is any real action still left to take. If the answer is no, your next task is not to construct a better argument. It is to stop mentally appearing before a courtroom that never adjourns. You may never hear the words you wanted to hear. No one may ever fully recognize what you did right. But there comes a point when being right stops being about convincing someone else and becomes a matter of acting according to what you have understood. If you learned something, use it. If a boundary became clear, maintain it. If a relationship revealed something important, remember it when you need to make a decision, not when you need to punish yourself by replaying the scene. Your life does not need to wait for someone else to change their version of the story before you can move forward. #5. Commitments you accepted once and now treat as permanent obligations. There are promises you made during one stage of your life that you continue obeying long after that stage has ended. You agreed to take care of something for a while, and years later it is still your responsibility. You started attending a commitment because it made sense at the time, but now you continue almost entirely out of habit. You became the person who organizes, calls, solves, accompanies, or covers certain needs, and no one ever asked again whether you could still do it. Maybe not even you. Repetition has a strange ability to turn a choice into something that feels mandatory. Something you did 10 times starts to feel like your role. Something you allowed for a year begins to feel like a rule. And when you try to change it, you experience a level of guilt that is completely out of proportion, as though you were breaking some solemn promise. But many commitments are not lifelong contracts. They were decisions made with the circumstances, energy, needs, and knowledge you had at the time. That does not mean you should abandon every responsibility as soon as it becomes inconvenient. Keeping your word matters. People need to be able to trust that you will not disappear the moment something becomes difficult. That is exactly why it is important to distinguish between responsibility and automatic permanence. Responsibility means honoring a commitment for as long as the commitment you made reasonably exists. Automatic permanence appears when you continue simply, because you have never allowed yourself to reconsider whether it still makes sense. This can happen at work, in your family, in a friendship, or even with completely personal decisions. You continue organizing the family vacations because you have always done it. You keep helping in a way that now overwhelms you because years ago you told someone they could count on you. You maintain a project that no longer matters to you because abandoning it now feels as though it would turn all your previous effort into a waste. But reevaluating a commitment does not erase the value of having honored it. Some stages fulfill their purpose and then end. One practical way to look at this is to ask yourself what you would choose today if that commitment were being presented to you for the first time. Not so that you automatically obey the answer, but so that you gain information. If today you would never agree to something you have been doing for years, it is worth understanding why it is still part of your life. Then you can decide which part needs to be fulfilled, which part can be renegotiated, and which part simply needs to end. Sometimes a conversation will be necessary. You may need to explain the change. You may need to give people time. You may need to finish what is already pending before stepping away. Quietly removing something from your life does not mean avoiding responsibility. It means you do not turn the change into a performance. You do not have to announce that, from now on, everything is going to be different. You can simply begin reorganizing what you agree to, reducing what you automatically take on, and stop renewing commitments just because they were there the year before. Life changes. Your energy changes. Your responsibilities change. Your judgment changes too. And there is an enormous difference between being loyal and turning every old decision into a permanent obligation. Loyalty requires memory, but it also requires judgment, because maintaining indefinitely everything you ever said yes to does not necessarily demonstrate character. Sometimes it only demonstrates that you have never allowed yourself to choose again. #6. The role you keep playing so you won't disappoint anyone. There are people who never directly ask you to be a certain way, and yet you feel as though you cannot stop being that person. In your family, perhaps you are the one who keeps a cool head. At work, you are the one who always finds a solution. In a relationship, you are the one who listens, compromises, and tries not to make things complicated. Among your friends, you are the one who is available whenever someone needs support. Over time, these roles can stop being behaviors and become an identity. You no longer help because you have decided to help. You help because you are the person who always helps. You are no longer strong in one particular situation. You feel as though you must appear strong even when you are exhausted. And then a difficult-to-see problem begins. You start protecting the image other people have of you even when that image no longer matches what you need. Maybe you want to say you cannot take care of something, but you imagine the disappointment of the people who have always counted on you. You want to change direction, but someone might ask what happened to you. You want to admit that you are tired, acknowledge that you do not know what to do, or say that something no longer interests you, but doing so feels like betraying a version of yourself that you have built for years. It is not always other people who force you to maintain that role. Sometimes you are the one anticipating their reaction. Maybe some people would accept the change much better than you imagine, but you never even give them the opportunity, because you continue acting according to what you think they expect from you. That is how you can end up living to preserve a reputation. The responsible one, the strong one, the one who never creates problems, the one who always understands. The cost is that a quality that was once valuable starts becoming rigid. Being responsible does not require you to accept every responsibility. Being generous does not mean you always have to volunteer. Being calm does not require you to hide what bothers you. Being strong does not mean acting as though nothing can affect you. Character does not mean performing the same version of yourself throughout your entire life. It means being able to choose your behavior according to what you believe is right now, even when that changes the way other people see you. One way to begin noticing this is to pay attention to the sentences that appear in your mind before you say yes. They'll think I've changed. I've always been the one who takes care of this. I don't want them to think I don't care anymore. What are they going to say if I quit now? Those sentences reveal that perhaps you are not evaluating only the decision. You are also trying to protect a character you have been playing. You do not need to destroy that image or prove anything. You can start much more quietly. Stop automatically volunteering. Say you are tired when you are tired. Admit that you changed your mind without building a defense around it. Allow someone to discover a version of you that does not exactly match the person they thought they knew. Some people will understand. Others may not. And that is where one of the hardest realities of adult life appears. Accepting that growing and changing may disappoint someone who preferred the version of you that was more convenient for them. That does not automatically make your change right. You still need to examine your decisions responsibly. But someone else's disappointment does not automatically become an order for you to remain the same. There is a difference between having principles and playing a role. Principles can remain with you while you change. A role requires you to repeat the same performance forever. And perhaps the time has come to stop playing a part of yourself that you no longer need to perform. #7. The responsibility of keeping the peace everywhere. In some rooms, you can sense the tension before anyone says a word. Two family members are upset, and you start looking for a way to change the subject. Two coworkers do not get along, and you end up acting as the intermediary. Someone responds sharply, and you are the one trying to soften the atmosphere. A relationship grows cold, and you catch yourself wondering what you could do to make everything okay again. Little by little, you can become accustomed to a task no one formally assigned to you, maintaining emotional peace between everyone else. It looks like a virtue, and very often it is. Knowing how to listen, helping facilitate a conversation, or preventing unnecessary escalation can be signs of maturity. The problem begins when you start feeling responsible for every uncomfortable emotion that occurs around you. Then other people's conflicts immediately become your work. If someone is angry, you try to calm them down. If two people are not speaking, you try to bring them back together. If someone feels uncomfortable with one of your decisions, you start changing that decision in order to restore a pleasant atmosphere. And without realizing it, you may begin confusing peace with the absence of tension. But they are not the same thing. Some necessary conversations are uncomfortable. Some reasonable boundaries upset people. Some disagreements do not need to be resolved. Some people need to learn how to speak directly to one another without using you as a bridge. Real harmony cannot always depend on one person absorbing everyone else's discomfort. Because then there is no harmony. There is simply one person paying the price so that it looks like harmony. Perhaps you have become so accustomed to this role that someone else's argument activates you, as though it were your personal emergency. You feel the need to intervene before things get worse. In those moments, a simple question can help. Does this actually require my involvement? Not, could I help? You probably could. The question is whether it is your responsibility. There are conflicts where your involvement is necessary because you have direct responsibility, because an injustice is happening in front of you, or because an important relationship requires your voice. But there are also tensions that belong to adults who are perfectly capable of managing them themselves. You can resist the temptation to explain to one person what the other person meant. You can let two people resolve their own misunderstanding. You can allow someone to be temporarily upset with you without immediately rushing to repair their emotional state. That last one is often the hardest. When you have spent your life trying to maintain harmony, someone else's anger can feel like proof that you have done something wrong. And it is not always proof of that. Sometimes it simply means you made a decision they would not have made. Removing this responsibility from your life does not mean becoming confrontational. It means accepting that calmness does not consist of controlling the emotional climate of every room you enter. You can contribute calm without making yourself responsible for producing it. You can speak respectfully without guaranteeing that other people will respond the same way. You can care about a relationship without preventing all friction from ever occurring. And you can allow certain people to experience the natural consequences of refusing to speak, listen, or resolve what belongs to them. Not every silence needs you to fill it. Not every tension needs you to dissolve it. Sometimes stepping away from the role of mediator is exactly what allows other people to begin taking responsibility for their own part. #8. Decisions from your past that you still treat like contracts. There are decisions you made so many years ago that you can no longer remember when you stopped questioning them. You chose a profession. You accepted a certain way of living. You moved somewhere. You started a project. You took on a responsibility. You decided that a particular goal would matter to you. At the time, perhaps it made sense, but the fact that a decision was reasonable then does not mean it has to govern what you do forever. Even so, changing can feel like betrayal. After everything I've invested, after all the years I've been here, I can't start over now. If I quit, all that effort will have been for nothing. Those sentences are powerful because they mix together two different things: the value of what you experienced and the obligation to continue living the same way. They are not the same thing. Something can have been worth doing for 10 years and still stop being right for you in the 11th. A relationship can have been important without needing to last forever. A project can have taught you a great deal and still need to end. A career choice can have been right for the person you were and later become something worth reconsidering. The past does not lose its value because the future takes a different direction. But our minds often resist this idea because walking away from something after investing so much in it makes the investment feel like a loss. So we add more time to justify the time already spent, more money to justify the money already spent, more effort to justify the effort already made. And we can end up sacrificing the next 5 years simply because we do not want to feel as though we wasted the previous 5. At that point, your loyalty is no longer directed toward your values. It is directed toward an old decision. Your past choices deserve respect, but not blind obedience. The person who made that decision did not have all the information you have today. They had not lived through what you have lived through since then. They did not know what you would later discover about your priorities, your limits, or your abilities. Changing your mind does not automatically make you inconsistent. Sometimes it means you updated your judgment. You can begin by reviewing the things you maintain only because you have already invested too much in them. You do not have to abandon them immediately. Just look at them as though they were not protected by their age. What do they give you today? What do they cost you today? Would you choose them again, knowing what you know now? These questions are not meant to disrespect your past. They are meant to prevent your past from becoming a permanent authority. There are commitments that, after reconsidering them, you will choose to keep. You may discover that they still make sense, and that all you needed was to remember why you chose them. Others will need adjustments, and some will already be over, even if you have not yet said those words out loud. In those cases, quietly removing something can mean something very simple. Stop renewing a decision just because you renewed it yesterday. You are not required to remain identical in order to prove that you were once sincere. You may have genuinely wanted something and later stop wanting it. You may have chosen wisely and later choose again with more information. The past deserves acknowledgement, not necessarily obedience. #9. The need to be completely certain before making a decision. There are decisions you postpone not because you know nothing about them. You postpone them because you still do not know enough to feel completely at ease. You want to change something, but you wait for one more sign. You want to end a situation, but you think maybe you need one more conversation. You want to start a project, but you feel there is still more information to gather. You want to choose between two paths, but neither one completely eliminates the possibility of making a mistake. And while you search for certainty that never arrives, you remain exactly where you were. Caution is necessary. Making decisions without thinking can be costly. There are situations where gathering information, consulting someone, or waiting a few days can prevent serious mistakes. But there is a point where thinking stops preparing you for a decision and starts replacing the decision itself. That point can be difficult to recognize because waiting looks responsible. You tell yourself you are still evaluating the possibilities, that you need to be sure, that you do not want to rush. But every new answer creates another question. Every risk you manage to reduce reveals another one. And what you are actually searching for is no longer information. It is a guarantee. The problem is that many important decisions cannot give you one. You cannot know exactly what a job will be like before you take it. You cannot know every consequence of saying no. You cannot be completely certain that a relationship will improve if you stay, or exactly how you will feel if you decide to leave. You cannot begin a new stage of your life knowing in advance that you will never regret it. Life rarely offers contracts like that. That is why it helps to distinguish between a decision that has not been thought through enough and a decision that is inevitably uncertain. The first needs more information. The second needs judgment. You can ask yourself what specific piece of information you are waiting for, and what would actually change if you received it. If you cannot answer that question, Perhaps you are no longer looking for information. You are looking for a feeling of safety. And that feeling may not appear before you act. You can also look at the cost of staying where you are. We tend to evaluate the risk of making a decision, but we rarely measure the risk of not making one with the same precision. Not changing jobs also has consequences. Not setting a boundary also creates an outcome. Not ending something also consumes time. Not starting is also a choice, even though it does not look like one. Prolonged indecision can appear neutral, but it almost never is. It allows the current situation to continue by default. That does not mean you should rush into a decision simply to prove that you are brave. You can set a reasonable deadline for deciding. Gather the information that is genuinely necessary. Accept that some variables will remain unresolved. And then you will have to do something that no amount of analysis can do for you. Choose without having complete certainty. Accepting that does not mean acting blindly. It means recognizing the limits of what you can know. Maybe a decision turns out worse than expected. Then you will have to adjust, learn, or choose again. The ability to revise your path is also part of making good decisions. Waiting for every doubt to disappear can keep you standing for years in front of a door that only reveals what is behind it after you walk through. Quietly removing this need from your life means you stop demanding a guarantee from the future that the future cannot give you. You do not need to know that everything will work out. You need to know why you are choosing, what risk you are willing to accept, and what you will do if circumstances change. Sometimes that is all the certainty available. And it can be enough. #10. The obligation to respond to everything immediately. A message appears on your screen, and before you have even finished what you were doing, you have already opened it. Someone calls, and you feel like you have to answer. An email arrives and occupies part of your mind until you respond. Someone makes a comment that bothers you, and you begin constructing a response before you have even decided whether the conversation deserves to continue. Over time, reacting quickly can become so normal that it no longer feels like a choice. It feels like politeness, responsibility, efficiency, even respect. But responding quickly and responding well are not always the same thing. Some responses become worse precisely because they come too fast. We answer from anger we have not yet understood. We accept a request before looking at our schedule. We commit to something because even a few minutes of silence feels uncomfortable. We enter an argument because leaving a comment unanswered feels like admitting that the other person is right. And so someone sends us a stimulus and gains immediate access to our attention, not necessarily because we chose to give it to them, because we learned to react. The problem is not the phone or the email. You can use both frequently and still exercise judgment. The problem begins when every interruption automatically receives priority over whatever you were already doing. Then your attention stops being organized entirely by your own decisions. It begins to be organized by whatever manages to reach you. And the more you practice immediate response, the harder it becomes to tolerate the space between receiving something and acting on it. That space, however, is one of the places where self-government can be practiced most clearly. You can read a message and not answer yet. You can let a phone call ring when you are busy. You can receive a request and say you need to check before committing. You can hear something that bothers you and allow a few minutes to pass before deciding what deserves to be said. This is not about turning delay into a rigid rule. Some communication does require speed. Some people depend on you. Some situations should not be postponed. A responsible life also includes being available when it genuinely matters. The point is different. Speed should be a decision, not a reflex. One simple practice is to stop interpreting every notification as a question that demands an immediate answer. First, when reasonable, finish what you were already doing. Then look at what is actually being asked of you, and only then decide when to respond. It seems like a small change, but it changes something important. Who decides the order of your attention? It is also useful to learn how to tolerate the discomfort that appears when you do not answer immediately. You may think the other person will get upset, that you will seem distant, that you will lose an opportunity, that if you do not respond now, the situation will get worse. Sometimes that will be true, but many other times you will discover that nothing terrible happens. The message is still there. The person waits. The response you give 20 minutes later is clearer than the one you would have sent from your first impulse. And little by little, you discover that being reachable does not mean being available at every moment. That difference may seem small from the outside, but from the inside, it changes your relationship with your time. Because a life filled with small reactions eventually becomes fragmented. No one has to take away your entire afternoon. It is enough for many different things to steal 5 minutes from you and then occupy another 10 minutes of your mind afterward. Removing the obligation to respond immediately does not mean disappearing or ignoring other people. It means reclaiming the ability to decide what deserves your attention now and what can wait. And perhaps that is one of the quietest ways to reclaim space in your own life. At the beginning, we talked about things that do not hurt you all at once, but wear you down because you have been carrying them for too long. After looking at all of them, perhaps one thing becomes clearer. Many of them do not remain in your life because someone is forcing you to keep them there. They remain because every day you perform small actions that keep them alive. You explain again a decision that was already clear. You rearrange your priorities because someone else arrives in a hurry. You leave a door open for a person who exists only in your expectations. You mentally return to an argument in an attempt to win a victory that no longer changes anything. You renew old commitments without asking again whether they still make sense. You keep performing a version of yourself that other people know because you are afraid of what will happen if you stop playing that role. You try to keep peace between people who also need to learn how to manage their own conflicts. You obey old decisions as though the person you used to be had permanent authority over the person you are today. You wait for a level of certainty that no important decision can provide, and you respond to every interruption as though the world had an immediate right to your attention. Quietly removing these things from your life does not mean aggressively cleaning everything out. You do not need to wake up tomorrow and cut people off, abandon your commitments, or refuse to help anyone. That would simply be replacing one automatic behavior with another. The real difference begins when you start noticing what you are sustaining and why. Some things deserve effort. Some relationships go through difficult stages and require patience. Some commitments need to be honored even when they feel heavy. Some people genuinely need your help. Some uncomfortable conversations should not be avoided. Good judgment does not mean eliminating everything that makes you uncomfortable. It means no longer keeping, out of habit, the things you already know are pulling you away from the way you want to live. And perhaps that is why many important changes happen quietly. Not because you need to hide them, but because they do not need to become declarations. One day, you stop sending that extra explanation. Another day, you say you cannot solve an urgent problem that does not belong to you. You stop checking to see whether someone has changed. You allow an argument to end without getting the last word. You reconsider a commitment. You accept disappointing someone's expectations. You let two adults resolve their own conflict. You choose again something you chose years ago. You make a decision even though you know some doubt will remain. And you finish what you were doing before looking at the message that just arrived. From the outside, it may not look like a dramatic transformation, but inside, something very concrete begins to happen. Your time, your attention, and your decisions stop being so readily available to everything that once claimed them automatically. You do not need to become a harder person. You need to become more aware of the things you continue saying yes to without truly choosing them. Because some things do not leave your life when you fight against them. They leave when you stop feeding them. And when that happens, silence no longer means keeping quiet. It begins to mean that you no longer need to announce every change in order to stand by it. If even one idea from this video helped you see your life more clearly, share it with someone who might need it too. Wisdom that is not shared is lost. This is Stoic spirit. Until next time,